Commander Vexthor stood near the large window of the space station. He looked out at the empty darkness of space. His forearms were folded behind his back. He had fought in 300 battles. He had been part of 17 long wars on different planets. He had commanded soldiers in 2 massive wars that covered entire sectors of space. The Kralix warrior had scars all over his red-scaled body. Every scar told a story of survival. His name was known across the galaxy as a fighter who never gave up. Behind him, the council room was busy with activity. Representatives from many different alien species were getting ready for an important meeting. News had traveled fast through official channels. The humans wanted to join the Galactic Defense Coalition. The humans were new to space travel. They had only learned how to travel faster than light 30 years ago. Most alien species thought humans were interesting but primitive. They did not think humans were very advanced. Vexthor clicked his mandibles together with interest. As the main military advisor for the coalition, he would meet these humans himself. He would decide if they were good enough for military service. Over his long career, he had tested hundreds of different species. He had seen the same pattern every time. Young species were excited and eager, but they did not have the hard experience that came from real war. They did not know what it meant to truly fight for survival. The door opened with a hissing sound. Ambassador Krelna walked toward him. She was a Thexian diplomat with shiny scales that changed colors in the light. Commander, the human group has arrived at the station. They want to meet with you before the official meeting starts. Vexthor turned around. His face showed no emotion. Send them to meeting room 7. I will test their military representative myself. A few minutes later, Vexthor entered the small meeting room. 3 humans were waiting inside. 2 wore nice formal clothes for diplomats. But the third human was different. He was older than the other 2. His hair had gray mixed with dark brown. His face had lines and wrinkles that showed his age. He wore a simple military uniform without many decorations. But something about the way he stood showed he had seen many things. He had experience. Commander Vexthor, the lead diplomat said in a smooth voice, I am Ambassador Richard Cole. This is my assistant, Linda Morrison. And this is Colonel Daniel Pierce. He will talk with you about military matters. Vexthor looked carefully at the colonel. The human's eyes were steady and calm. He did not look nervous. Usually when Vexthor met representatives from young species, they looked scared or uncomfortable. Their eyes were wide with fear, but this human showed no fear at all. Colonel Pierce, Vexthor said in his deep voice. A small device translated his words into human language. Your species wants to join the coalition. You understand that we need to see proof of combat ability. You must show us you understand strategy and tactics. I do, Commander. Pierce's voice was calm and professional. Your species only learned to travel between stars recently. What military experience do you have? Pierce's face did not change. I have served for 42 years, Commander. I have fought in battles on 3 different continents of my planet. I have been in conflicts that lasted through 4 decades of human history. Vexthor's mandibles clicked in a dismissive way. You fought against your own kind. You fought wars before you reached space. The coalition faces threats from hostile civilizations. They have advanced technology. They have battle strategies developed over centuries. I understand your concern, Commander, Pierce replied calmly. Perhaps it would help if I told you about human military history. Then you can judge for yourself. Vexthor pointed to a chair with one of his 4 arms. Very well. Tell me your story. Help me understand. Colonel Pierce sat down in the chair. Vexthor remained standing. This was a common trick he used to make others feel small and weak. The human seemed unbothered by this. He did not look uncomfortable at all. Commander, I need to tell you something important about human history first, Pierce began. Humanity has never known real peace. In all our recorded history, going back thousands of years, there has never been a single period of 10 years without war somewhere on our planet. There has always been fighting. There has always been organized warfare. Vexthor's eyes narrowed a little bit. Most species he met had peaceful histories. They had occasional conflicts, but constant warfare was very rare in the galaxy. It was unusual for a species to fight all the time. Let me give you an example, Pierce continued. In just the 20th century of our calendar, humanity fought 2 massive global conflicts. We call them world wars. The first one lasted 4 years. Approximately 17 million people died. The second one lasted 6 years. Between 70 and 85 million people were killed. The commander's body became more tense. Those were very high numbers of dead. Even by galactic standards, those were serious casualties. But he had seen worse in wars that covered entire sectors of space. This was not enough to impress him yet. The Second World War brought something new to human warfare, Pierce said. His voice became darker and more serious. We developed nuclear weapons. These are devices that can destroy entire cities in just a few seconds. We used 2 of these weapons against the nation of Japan to end the war. The city of Hiroshima had 340,000 people living there. The bomb killed 80,000 people instantly. Within a fraction of a second, they were gone. Tens of thousands more died slowly over the following months. They died from radiation poisoning. It was a terrible way to die. Vexthor's mandibles stopped their clicking. He stood very still. Weapons that could destroy entire cities were not completely unknown among species that traveled in space. But most civilizations developed such weapons after they learned to travel between stars. These humans had created weapons of mass destruction while they were still trapped on their home planet. That was very unusual. It was also very dangerous. 3 days after Hiroshima, Pierce continued, we dropped a second nuclear bomb. This one hit the city of Nagasaki. 70,000 more people died instantly. But I need you to understand something important, Commander. We did not stop building these weapons after the war ended. For the next 45 years, humanity lived under constant threat. 2 massive groups of nations pointed thousands of nuclear weapons at each other. We had enough weapons to make our entire planet unable to support life. We could have destroyed our world many times over. And we lived like this for decades. But your species survived, Vexthor said. His voice had lost some of its dismissive tone. He sounded more uncertain now. Yes, we survived. But just barely, Pierce answered. We came very close to launching those weapons on several occasions. There were computer errors that almost started a war. There were misunderstandings between leaders. There were times when individual officers had to make quick decisions. Their choices saved billions of lives. Commander, humanity learned how to fight wars where one single mistake could end our entire species. We developed strategies for this. We created ways of thinking about warfare when the stakes were the complete destruction of everything we knew. We learned to live with the possibility of total annihilation every single day. Vexthor was silent. He had fought in sector wars. Those were massive conflicts. But even those wars had rules and boundaries. The idea of an entire species holding itself hostage was hard for him to understand. The idea that they did this for decades was even harder to process. You said you personally have combat experience, Vexthor finally said. Yes, Commander. I have fought in 3 major conflicts. I have been part of many smaller operations. Would you like to hear about one of them? Vexthor gestured yes with 2 of his arms. He wanted to hear more. For the first time in many years, he felt genuinely curious about what he would learn. Pierce's eyes became distant. He was remembering things from long ago. The Iraq War. I was a captain at that time. I commanded a company of soldiers in an urban combat zone. Urban warfare is very brutal, Commander. Every building can be used as a fortress. Every window might have a sniper hiding behind it. Every street corner can become a place where people die. You never know what is safe and what is dangerous. Our mission was to clear a section of a city called Fallujah. About 300,000 people lived in this city. The enemy had prepared defensive positions throughout the entire city. They used civilian buildings and infrastructure against us. They turned homes into bunkers. They turned hospitals into command centers. We had to clear the city building by building. We went room by room. We checked every floor of every structure. Vexthor was listening very carefully now. His military mind was processing the tactical problems this kind of fighting would create. The fighting continued for 6 weeks. My company alone cleared 247 buildings. We lost 11 men during this operation. But I need you to understand something about human soldiers, Commander. Every single one of my men knew that the next house they entered might be their last. They knew the door they broke through might have a bomb behind it. They knew the room they cleared might have an enemy wearing explosives ready to kill himself and everyone near him. And they did it anyway, day after day, building after building. They kept going. Pierce's voice stayed steady, but Vexthor could hear the weight of old memories behind the words. These were not easy things for the human to talk about. Human soldiers do not just fight when we know we will win, Commander. We fight when the odds are against us. We fight when we are outnumbered. We fight when the enemy has better weapons. We fight when we are surrounded with no way out. We fight until our bodies cannot continue, and then we find a way to keep fighting anyway. Vexthor felt something strange. For the first time in many decades, he felt uncertain. It was not exactly fear. The Kralix did not experience fear the same way other species did, but it was something close to that feeling. He was starting to realize that he might have completely misjudged this species. You said you fought in multiple conflicts, Vexthor said carefully. Tell me about another one. Pierce nodded slowly. There was a war called Vietnam. It lasted 20 years for my country. I was not born yet when it started, but I studied it very carefully at our military academy. It is taught as an important lesson about asymmetric warfare. That means warfare between enemies with very different levels of power and technology. We fought an enemy that had no air force. They had very little armored vehicles. Their technology was much worse than ours. On paper, looking at the numbers and equipment, it should have been an easy victory for us. But the enemy understood something important about humans. They understood that we could be outlasted. They could make us tired. They could make the war last so long that we would give up. Vexthor's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Attrition warfare. Wearing down the enemy over time? Yes, but taken to an extreme that you probably have not seen in galactic conflicts, Pierce said. The enemy built an entire network of tunnels underground. These were not simple holes in the ground, Commander. They built over 200 miles of underground passages. These passages connected entire villages together. They lived underground for years. They fought from underground. They slept underground. They treated their wounded soldiers underground. They stored all their supplies underground. Some of these tunnels were so deep and so well hidden that we never found them. We responded with tactics that would shock most civilized species. We dumped over 18 million gallons of chemical defoliants across the jungle. These chemicals killed all the plants so the enemy could not hide. We dropped more bombs on that small region than all the bombs dropped in the entire Second World War. Think about that for a moment, Commander. We dropped more explosives on one small area than we used in a global conflict that killed 85 million people. We developed special units for tunnel warfare. These soldiers would crawl into those underground networks. They carried only pistols and flashlights. They would fight the enemy in complete darkness. The tunnels were so tight that they could not stand up. They could barely move. They fought in spaces where they could not see, could not hear properly, and could not escape quickly. And they did this voluntarily. They volunteered for this duty. The Kralix commander's calm expression was cracking. The picture Pierce was painting showed a conflict with no limits. Both sides were willing to endure anything. Both sides would do whatever was necessary. There were no boundaries to what they would accept. The casualty numbers tell an important story, Commander. Over 58,000 American soldiers died. Over 300,000 were wounded. These are my people. These are soldiers from my nation. But the other side suffered much worse. Conservative estimates say over 800,000 of their soldiers died. Civilian casualties were in the millions. Multiple millions of innocent people died. And despite all this death, despite all this destruction, they fought until we left their country. They never surrendered. They never gave up. Pierce leaned back in his chair. That is the first thing you need to understand about humans, Commander. We have a capacity for endurance that does not make logical sense. When we are pushed to the edge of what we can bear, we do not break. We adapt instead. We change our tactics. We find new ways to fight. We discover methods that did not exist before. But there is a second thing you need to know. Pierce's eyes locked directly onto Vexthor's eyes. That capacity for endurance works both ways. When humans decide to wage total war, we commit completely. Let me tell you about the firebombing campaigns of the Second World War. Vexthor was not sure he wanted to hear this story, but he remained silent and listened. There was a city called Dresden. We bombed it for 3 days straight. The bombing created what we call a firestorm. The fires were so hot that they melted steel. Between 25 and 35,000 people died. Most of them were civilians. Normal people, not soldiers. Then there was Tokyo. In a single night of bombing, we killed over 100,000 people. The fires burned so incredibly hot that they created winds as powerful as hurricanes. People were burned alive where they stood. Others died because the flames consumed all the oxygen in the air. They suffocated even though they were not directly hit by bombs. We did these things, Pierce said quietly, not because we were cruel. We did them because we made a calculated decision. We believed it would save more lives in the long run. We thought it would make the war end faster. Whether that decision was right or wrong, I cannot say. But it demonstrates something crucial about human warfare. When we commit to total war, when we decide that we must win at any cost, we accept no half measures. We do not fight with one hand tied behind our backs. We use everything we have. Vexthor found himself taking a step backward. His 300 years of combat experience included orbital bombardments. He had been part of planetary sieges that lasted for years. But something about the systematic nature of human warfare disturbed him. The calculations they made, the willingness to make terrible choices, the ability to do horrible things while still believing they were doing the right thing. "Commander," Pierce continued, "you asked about our military capability. Let me give you some context. In just the last century, humanity has fought in over 250 significant armed conflicts. We have fought in every type of environment you can imagine. Deserts where the temperature reaches 50 degrees. Jungles where you cannot see 10 meters in front of you. Arctic regions where the temperature drops to 40 degrees below zero. Urban areas with millions of people. Mountain ranges at high altitude where the air is thin. We have developed and then abandoned more military strategies and tactics than most species will ever think of. We have created weapon systems that other civilizations would consider immoral. We have created rules of war, and then broken them when we felt we had to. And most importantly, we have learned how to keep fighting when fighting seems impossible. We have learned to find victory when everyone says victory cannot be achieved." The room was very quiet. Ambassador Cole and Linda Morrison had been sitting silently through most of this conversation. They watched as the famous Kralix commander's confident posture slowly changed. He looked less certain now. He looked like someone who had just learned something that challenged everything he believed. Vexthor stood very still for a long moment. He was processing everything he had just heard. His mind was working through the implications. Finally, he spoke again. "I need to hear more," he said quietly. "Tell me about your training. Tell me how you prepare soldiers for this kind of warfare." Linda Morrison stood up from her chair. She had been sitting quietly during most of the conversation between Pierce and Vexthor. Now she spoke for the first time. "Commander Vexthor, may I add something to what Colonel Pierce has shared with you?" The Kralix warrior nodded slowly. He was still processing everything he had heard. His mind was working through all the information. "I am a military historian, Commander. I study the history of warfare. My special area of knowledge is comparing how different human cultures fight wars. What Colonel Pierce described to you, those are relatively recent conflicts. They happened in the last 100 years or so. Let me take you back much further in time. Let me show you that this pattern is not new for humanity." She walked over to a holographic display device and activated it. Images of ancient Earth appeared in the air between them. The Mongol conquests happened in the 13th century of our calendar. That was over 700 years ago. A group of nomadic people who moved from place to place and did not build permanent cities, created the largest connected land empire in all of human history. They conquered more territory than anyone before or since. And they killed approximately 40 million people while doing it. That was about 11% of the entire world population at that time. 1 out of every 9 humans alive died because of these conquests. They were masters of psychological warfare. That means they used fear as a weapon. They would sometimes completely destroy entire cities, killing everyone inside just to terrify other cities. When word spread about what happened, other cities would surrender immediately without fighting. They were too afraid to resist. The Mongols understood that sometimes the threat of violence is more effective than violence itself. Morrison changed the holographic image to show ancient Roman soldiers. The Roman Empire. They conquered most of the known world at their time through superior organization. They had better logistics, better training, better discipline than their enemies. But more than that, they had an absolute refusal to accept defeat. There was a battle where they lost over 50,000 men in a single day. 50,000 soldiers killed in just one battle. And they still won the war. They just kept fighting. They raised new armies and continued the campaign. Their military doctrine was very simple. Rome does not negotiate with enemies. Rome only negotiates with subjects. You either submit to Rome or Rome destroys you. There is no third option. This mindset allowed them to build an empire that lasted for over 1,000 years. Vexthor was listening with complete attention now. He had stopped thinking about other things. All his focus was on understanding what these humans were telling him. There was a war in Europe called the 30 Years' War. Morrison continued. It was a religious and political conflict. It killed between 8 and 12 million people. But the deaths came not just from fighting. They came from disease and famine that followed the armies. Some regions of Europe lost over 50% of their population. Imagine that, Commander. Imagine losing half of everyone you know. Half of your neighbors dead. Half of your community gone. And when this war finally ended after 3 decades of horror, the survivors did not give up. They rebuilt their societies. They reorganized their nations. And they prepared for the next war. Morrison's voice grew more intense as she spoke. Commander, these patterns repeat throughout all of human history. We have fought wars over natural resources like water and farmland. We have fought over territory and borders. We have fought over religious beliefs. We have fought over political ideas and systems of government. Sometimes we have fought simply because we could not find a peaceful solution to our disagreements. We have fought for noble causes that we believed in deeply. We have also fought for terrible causes that we should be ashamed of. But regardless of the reason, we have always fought with total commitment. We do not know how to fight halfway. It is not in our nature. I need to understand something, Vexthor said. His voice sounded uncertain, which was very unusual for him. You describe conflicts where large portions of your population died, where entire regions were destroyed and left empty. How did your species survive all of this? How are you still here? Pierce answered the question. Because we rebuilt, Commander. After every single conflict, no matter how devastating it was, humanity rebuilt everything. We have burned our cities to ashes and then raised them again from those ashes. We have lost millions of people, and then our population grew again. We have destroyed our farms, our roads, our buildings, and then we reconstructed them all. War is terrible. War is one of the worst things that humans do to each other, but it has never been bad enough to completely stop us. We have always survived. We have always continued. Until the nuclear age, Morrison added. For the first time in human history, we developed weapons that could actually end our entire species. Not just kill many people, but kill everyone, and all human life on Earth, make our planet uninhabitable. And that changed something very fundamental in how we think. We learned restraint, not because we suddenly became more moral or more peaceful. We learned restraint because we had to. Because the alternative was extinction. We created new military doctrines based on deterrence. That means preventing war by making the cost too high. We built elaborate systems to prevent accidental launches of nuclear weapons. We developed psychological frameworks that allowed us to fight limited conventional wars while living under the shadow of nuclear weapons. We learned how to have small wars without letting them become the big war that would end everything. Pierce spoke again. Let me tell you about a war called Korea. This war happened in the 1950s during the nuclear age. We faced an enemy that had different rules about casualties. They did not care how many of their soldiers died. They used human wave attacks. They would send tens of thousands of soldiers forward at the same time. Knowing that most of them would die, they just kept sending more soldiers until they overwhelmed the defenders. There was a battle at a place called Chosin Reservoir. 30,000 Allied troops were surrounded by 120,000 enemy forces. And this happened in winter. The temperature dropped to 30 degrees below zero. That is so cold that exposed skin freezes in minutes. That is so cold that weapons stop working properly because the metal contracts and the mechanisms jam. Our Marines fought their way out of that trap. It took 17 days of continuous combat. They fought while outnumbered 4-1. They fought in weather conditions where frostbite was as dangerous as enemy bullets. The wounded had to be carried because vehicles could not move through the terrain. Equipment froze and stopped working. Food froze solid. Medical supplies froze. Everything was against them. The Marines lost over 700 men killed in that battle, but they killed an estimated 15,000 enemy soldiers, and they completed a fighting retreat that military historians still study today as an example of excellence under impossible conditions. When a reporter asked their commander if they were retreating, he said something that became famous. He said they were not retreating. They were advancing in a different direction. Even in defeat, even when surrounded and freezing, humans maintain their fighting spirit. Vexthor's forearms now hung at his sides. His military posture was completely gone. He no longer stood like the confident warrior who had entered this room. He stood like someone who had just learned something that shook his understanding of the universe. You are telling me, Vexthor said slowly, carefully choosing each word, that your species has spent its entire existence perfecting the art of warfare. That you have survived conflicts that should have destroyed you completely. that you developed weapons capable of ending your world and then learned to live with those weapons, that you have fought in every possible environment and under every possible condition. Is that correct? Yes, Pierce said simply. His answer was direct and honest, and now you want to join a coalition whose purpose is defending this galaxy from hostile forces that want to harm peaceful species. Ambassador Cole spoke for the first time since the military discussion had begun. Commander Vexthor, humanity has learned very hard lessons about war. We understand its cost better than most species in this galaxy. We understand because we have paid that cost over and over again throughout our history. We have learned that sometimes the only way to ensure peace is to be prepared for war. We have learned that when war comes, when it becomes unavoidable, hesitation costs lives. Delay costs lives. Weakness invites aggression. We are not asking to join your coalition because we are naive idealists. We are not children who think we can solve every problem with kind words and good intentions. We are asking to join because we understand reality. We understand that dangerous species exist in this galaxy. We understand that predators hunt prey, and we understand that prey species survive only by becoming harder targets, by being too dangerous to attack, by making the cost of aggression too high to accept. Vexithor said nothing. He simply stood there, thinking about everything he had heard. His world had changed in the last hour. His understanding of these humans had completely transformed. The formal council meeting began 3 hours later. Vexthor stood in front of all the assembled representatives from different species across the galaxy. His forearms were clasped behind his back. This was the traditional Kralix posture that showed deep thought and contemplation. The council chamber became completely silent. Everyone waited to hear what the legendary commander would say. They waited for his evaluation of the human application to join the coalition. Honored representatives, Vexthor began. His voice carried across the large chamber. Translation devices converted his words into hundreds of different languages. I have completed my evaluation of human military capability. My findings are not what I expected. They are not what anyone expected. A wave of quiet conversation rippled through the chamber. People whispered to each other. The Kralix commander was famous for his harsh evaluations. He was known for being very critical. Many people in the room expected him to reject the humans. They thought he would say the humans were too inexperienced, too new to space, too primitive for coalition membership. In my 300 years of service, Vexthor continued, I have evaluated 147 different species for military potential. I have fought alongside 53 different alien races. I have commanded forces and campaigns across 17 different sectors of space. I believed that I understood the nature of warfare. I believed that I knew what characteristics make a species effective in combat. I believed that I had seen everything there was to see. Vexthor's mandibles clicked slowly. He was choosing his words very carefully. Everyone in the room could tell this was important. The humans have forced me to reconsider my fundamental assumptions. They have made me question things I thought I knew with certainty. Most species that we encounter in this galaxy developed advanced technology before they experienced significant warfare. They learned how to reach the stars before they learned how to efficiently kill each other. This is the normal pattern. This is what we expect to see, and there is a good reason for this pattern. Species that master warfare before they develop space travel usually destroy themselves. They kill themselves off before they can leave their home planet. They create weapons too powerful for their wisdom. They fight wars too destructive for their world to survive. This is why most spacefaring species have peaceful histories. The violent ones never make it to space. They end their own existence first. The chamber was now completely silent. Even the species that usually talked during meetings were quiet and still. Everyone was listening carefully. Humanity is different. They are an exception to this pattern. They mastered warfare thousands of years ago. They became very, very good at organized violence. And somehow, against all probability, they survived long enough to reach space. They developed weapons that could destroy their entire planet, while they were still confined to that planet. They fought wars where losing meant extinction, and they chose to fight those wars anyway. They lived with the constant possibility of complete annihilation for decades, and they survived it all. Most species in this room view war as an unfortunate necessity. War is something that happens when diplomacy fails. It is a last resort, something to be avoided if at all possible. Humans view war differently. They see war as a continuation of policy by other means. War is not separate from politics and diplomacy. It is part of the same system, just another tool to achieve objectives. They have developed entire academic disciplines dedicated to studying warfare. They have universities where they teach the history of battles. They teach strategy and tactics as formal subjects. Their children memorize the strategies of generals who died thousands of years ago. They study ancient battles the way we study mathematics or physics. War is woven into their culture at every level. Vexthor paused. He wanted his next words to have maximum impact. They have words and concepts that we do not even have categories for in our military theory. Guerrilla warfare, asymmetric conflict, mutually assured destruction, Pyrrhic victory, scorched earth policy, totalvar. Each of these terms represents a depth of experience with organized violence that exceeds what most galactic species accumulate over their entire spacefaring history. Each term represents lessons learned through blood and death and suffering. Vexthor turned to face the human delegation directly. He looked right at Colonel Pierce and the others. Colonel Pierce told me about a battle his species fought 200 years ago, a naval battle on their planet's oceans. It was called Trafalgar. The admiral who commanded the victorious fleet died during the fighting. He was shot and mortally wounded. But before he died, he sent a final message to his fleet. His last words were these: "Thank God I have done my duty." He died having achieved victory at the cost of his own life, and he considered this a successful outcome. He died satisfied that he had completed his mission. This mindset is important to understand. This willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. This acceptance that duty may require your death. This is not considered exceptional or heroic by human standards. This is expected. This is normal. This is what human soldiers are supposed to do. Give everything, including their lives, to complete the mission. The Kralix commander's voice became harder now. It took on the formal tone of an official military report. The humans shared details of conflicts that I initially dismissed as primitive, simple conflicts between pre-space civilizations. But upon deeper reflection, I realized these conflicts were anything but primitive. They described urban combat operations that required the clearance of hundreds of buildings, fighting room by room, floor by floor, door by door, against enemies who use civilian infrastructure as weapons. This requires a level of tactical flexibility that exceeds anything in our standard military doctrine. It requires soldiers who can make independent decisions. Soldiers who can adapt to rapidly changing situations without waiting for orders from commanders. They described wars of attrition that lasted for decades. Wars where both sides committed resources far beyond what any rational cost-benefit analysis would justify. Wars that made no economic sense. Wars that brought no strategic advantage. But they fought them anyway. This demonstrates a strategic patience and a cultural commitment to conflict that most species simply cannot sustain. Most species would negotiate peace long before reaching such extremes. Most troubling of all, they described the development and use of weapons of mass destruction while still confined to a single planet. They created the means to end their own species, and then they spent 50 years pointing those weapons at each other, all while developing the diplomatic frameworks and military procedures to prevent their use. They learned to fight conventional wars while nuclear weapons hung over their heads like a sword. They learned to make military decisions knowing that one mistake could trigger the end of everything. One error could mean extinction. Vexthor paused again. He wanted to let these implications sink into the minds of everyone in the chamber. He wanted them to truly understand what he was saying. My initial assessment was that humanity lacked the experience necessary for coalition membership. I was completely wrong. Humanity does not lack experience. They have more military experience than species 5 times their age. Species that have been traveling in space for centuries do not have the depth of combat knowledge that humans possess. What humans lack is experience with the specific technical challenges of interstellar warfare. They do not know how to fight in space yet. They do not know how to coordinate fleets across light years. But their fundamental understanding of conflict is deeper than ours. Their organizational structures are more refined than ours. Their tactical thinking is more flexible than ours. Their strategic frameworks are more comprehensive than ours. And most importantly, their cultural relationship with warfare is more mature than ours. The commander's forearms spread wide. This was the Kralix gesture used for making formal declarations. For stating official positions, I recommend immediate acceptance of humanity's application to join the Galactic Defense Coalition. Furthermore, I recommend that they be granted full military integration privileges. I recommend we skip the standard probationary period entirely. This is unprecedented, but the situation warrants it. We need their expertise more than they need our acceptance. We need their knowledge. We need their experience. We need their warriors, the chamber erupted. Many delegates started talking at once. Several immediately stood up to object. The noise level rose dramatically. The Thexian ambassador managed to get everyone's attention and stood to speak formally. Commander Vexthor, with all due respect, this recommendation is completely unprecedented. We have never granted full integration without a probationary evaluation period. Never in the history of this coalition. The humans are too new to space travel. They do not understand the challenges of interstellar warfare. This is too fast. Too soon. Vexthor's mandibles clicked sharply. It was a harsh sound. The Kralix equivalent of a bitter laugh. Too new to space, perhaps. Yes, that is true. But we are too new to the kind of warfare they have already mastered. When the Scorix hive fleets arrive in contested space, and they will arrive eventually, we will need warriors who understand how to fight when survival is not guaranteed. Ambassador Cole stood up from his seat. He maintained the calm diplomatic posture that was expected from someone in his position. He looked around the council chamber at all the different species represented there. Commander Vexthor, honored. Members of the council, humanity is deeply honored by this assessment. We are grateful for the commander's thorough evaluation. However, we want to be absolutely clear about our intentions. We want everyone here to understand why we are seeking membership in this coalition. We do not seek membership to export human methods of warfare across the galaxy. We do not want to teach other species how to be more violent. We do not want to spread conflict. We seek membership because we believe deeply in the principle of collective defense against aggression. We believe that peaceful species have the right to exist without fear. We believe that predators must be opposed when they threaten the innocent. We have learned through very bitter experience, through centuries of pain and loss, that predators do exist. Evil exists, aggression exists, and these things must be confronted. Sometimes words are not enough. Sometimes diplomacy fails. Sometimes the only way to protect innocent lives is through organized military force. We wish this were not true, but wishing does not change reality. We offer our experience to this coalition. We offer our capabilities. We offer our commitment to the mission of defending peaceful species from those who would harm them. This is what we bring to the table. Vexthor nodded slowly. His mandibles clicked in a thoughtful pattern. I understand, Ambassador, and I want to clarify something for the Council. Something important that might not be obvious from my report. The humans are not warmongers. They are not a species that loves conflict or seeks it out. Everything Colonel Pierce shared with me today was presented with what I can only describe as profound sadness, deep sorrow. When he spoke of the wars his species has fought, when he described the death and destruction, I could see the weight of it on him. I could hear it in his voice. They understand the cost of warfare better than any species I have ever encountered. They understand because they have paid that cost repeatedly. They have paid it in blood. They have paid it in ruined cities. They have paid it in orphaned children and widowed spouses. They have paid it in trauma that lasts for generations. They know what war really means in a way that most of us do not. Colonel Pierce told me something at the end of our private meeting. Something that stuck with me. He said that the dream of every human soldier is that their children will never need to become soldiers. That the wars they fight will be the last wars their people have to fight. That their sacrifices will purchase lasting peace for future generations. They know this dream is probably impossible. Their long history has taught them that peace is always temporary, that conflict always returns eventually. But they maintain the dream anyway. They hold on to hope even when experience tells them hope is foolish. That combination of realistic understanding and hopeful idealism is exactly what this coalition needs. We need people who understand war but still dream of peace. The debate in the council continued for many hours. Different delegates stood up to express their opinions. Some supported immediate acceptance of humanity. Others argued for caution and delay. Some wanted the standard probationary period. Others agreed with Vexthor's recommendation for full integration. The arguments went back and forth. Points were made and countered. But the outcome was never truly in doubt. When Commander Vexthor of the Kralix recommended something, when the coalition's most respected military mind gave his endorsement, the council listened. His voice carried enormous weight. The final vote was not unanimous. Some delegates still had reservations, but it was decisive. A clear majority voted to accept humanity into the Galactic Defense Coalition with full military integration privileges. No probationary period, no restrictions, full membership from day one. 3 days after the vote, Colonel Pierce stood on the observation deck of humanity's first coalition military outpost. He looked out through the large windows at the fleet of ships from many different species. Vessels from a dozen worlds floated in formation. Each one represented a different civilization, a different culture, a different way of seeing the universe, but all united in a common purpose: defense against aggression, protection of the peaceful. Behind him, Pierce heard footsteps, heavy footsteps, the distinctive sound of Kralix's boots on metal decking. He turned to see Vexthor approaching. "Colonel, I wanted to speak with you privately, away from the formal meetings and official protocols." Pierce turned to face the commander fully. "Of course, Commander, what is on your mind?" "I have fought for 300 years," Vexthor said quietly. His voice was much softer than usual, not the commanding tone he used in official settings. "I have seen horrors that you cannot imagine. I have made decisions that still haunt me when I try to sleep. I believed that I understood warfare in all its forms. I believed that I had experienced everything there was to experience in combat. I was wrong. Listening to you describe human conflicts, I realized something important, something that shook me. I have never fought in a war where my entire species could be extinguished. I have never faced an enemy where losing meant the end of absolutely everything I know, everyone I love, everything my people have built. I have never had to make decisions with those stakes. The wars I have fought were terrible, yes. Many died. But my species was never at risk of extinction. There was always a future, regardless of whether we won or lost any particular battle. The old Kralix warrior's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "You described living under the threat of nuclear annihilation as though it were normal, as though it were just another challenge to overcome. Living with existential dread every day while still maintaining civilization, still raising children, still planning for the future. That terrifies me, Colonel. Not because it shows weakness in your species, quite the opposite. It terrifies me because it shows a strength I did not know was possible, a resilience I have never encountered before." Pierce was quiet for a long moment. He looked back out at the fleet, at the stars beyond. Finally, he spoke. "Commander, can I tell you something that was not in my official briefing? Something personal?" "Please do. Everything I described to you, all those wars and conflicts and terrible weapons, they do terrify me, not in some abstract intellectual way. They terrify me personally and specifically. I have nightmares about Fallujah. I wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, and for a few seconds, I am back in that city. I am clearing buildings again. I am wondering if the next door I open will be my last. I am watching my friends die again. The therapy helps. Time helps. But it never completely goes away. But here is the important thing, Commander. Every human soldier I have ever known carries similar weight. We all have our own nightmares. We all have our own scars, physical and mental. We train extensively for war. We prepare constantly for conflict. We study tactics and strategy until we can recite them in our sleep. But we also understand the human cost in ways that statistics and casualty figures can never fully convey. We understand because we have lived it. We have seen it. We have felt it. That is why humanity wants to join this coalition, not because we love war. Quite the opposite. We hate war. We hate it so much that we got very, very good at it. We learned that the best way to prevent wars is to be so prepared for them that potential aggressors choose diplomacy instead. We learned that appearing weak invites attack. We learned that readiness prevents conflict better than any treaty or agreement. Vexthor's mandibles clicked slowly, thoughtfully. An ancient strategy. The Romans called it something similar. Peace through strength. Close, Pierce said. Though we prefer to think of it as peace through readiness, the word strength can imply aggression. It can suggest that you intend to use that strength to dominate others. Readiness is different. Readiness implies defense. It implies that you are prepared to respond if attacked, but you are not seeking to attack others. A subtle distinction, Vexthor observed, but an important one. Strength can be used to dominate and control. Readiness can only be used to respond and defend. The distinction matters. They stood together in comfortable silence for a while. Just two old soldiers looking out at the fleet, watching the ships move in their formations. Each ship carried crew members from different worlds, all of them now working together. All of them part of something larger than themselves. Finally, Vexthor spoke again. His voice was curious, genuinely interested. "Colonel, I must ask you something. After everything your species has endured, after all the conflicts and casualties, and close calls with extinction, how do you personally maintain hope? How do you keep believing that things can get better?" Pierce smiled slightly. It was a small smile, but genuine. Because despite everything, despite all the wars and weapons and waste, humanity is still here. We are still alive. We have survived our own worst impulses. We have learned, slowly and painfully, how to be better than we were. We have turned bitter enemies into close allies. We have built international institutions to prevent conflicts before they start. We have developed technologies for peace as well as for war. We have made progress, even if that progress is sometimes hard to see. Every generation of humans hopes that they will be the last generation to know war, Pierce continued. Every generation is disappointed. War keeps coming back. Conflict keeps arising. New threats emerge. Old enemies are replaced by new ones. But every generation also makes some progress toward that goal of lasting peace, however small that progress might be. We take one step forward, maybe half a step back, but over time we move in the right direction. That is what maintains hope, Commander. Not naive optimism that ignores reality. Not blind faith that everything will magically work out. But evidence-based hope. Hope grounded in actual progress, even when that progress is slow and difficult. We look at where we were 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and we can see that things have gotten better. Not perfect, not ideal, but better. Vexthor was silent for a long moment. He processed this philosophy. This way of thinking was foreign to him. The Kraliks were warriors by nature. They accepted war as inevitable and eternal. The idea that conflict could be reduced over time, that progress toward peace was possible, this was not part of his cultural framework. Finally, his mandibles clicked in what Pierce had learned was the Kraliks' way of showing respectful acknowledgement. Perhaps that is what truly frightened me when we first spoke, Colonel. Not your capacity for violence, though that is impressive and intimidating. What frightened me was your refusal to let that capacity define you. Your refusal to accept war as your natural state. Any species can learn to destroy. Destruction is easy. Violence is simple. What takes something truly rare and special is to learn destruction and then choose construction anyway. To become skilled at violence and then work toward peace. To master the art of war while dreaming of its end. Vexthor extended one of his forearms toward Pierce. It was a gesture of respect in Kralik's culture. Welcome to the Galactic Defense Coalition, Colonel Pierce. Welcome to humanity. I suspect that the galaxy will be very different with your species in it. I believe it will be different in good ways, though the transition may be difficult. Pierce reached out and grasped Vexthor's arm in the human gesture of a handshake. Two very different species from worlds light years apart, making a connection, building a bridge. Thank you, Commander. We will do our best to make it different in good ways. We will try to bring our experience without bringing our worst habits. We will try to share our strength without spreading our violence. I believe you will succeed, Vexthor said. And for the first time in 300 years of warfare, the battle-hardened Kralix warrior felt something he had not experienced in living memory. Genuine optimism about the future. Real hope that things could improve. Not certainty, but possibility. And possibility was enough. Over the following weeks and months, human military personnel began arriving at coalition facilities throughout the galaxy. They came in small groups at first. Advisors and observers, specialists in particular areas of warfare. They studied coalition technology and tactics. They learned about the specific challenges of space combat. They absorbed information like sponges, asking endless questions, taking detailed notes, running simulations, but they also taught. Human officers gave lectures on urban warfare tactics, on counterinsurgency operations, on psychological operations, on logistics in hostile territory. on fighting in extreme environments, on maintaining morale during extended campaigns, on small unit tactics and individual initiative, on leadership under pressure. Coalition military commanders who attended these lectures came away changed. They saw warfare from new angles. They considered possibilities they had never imagined. They learned that many of their assumptions about combat were not universal truths, but cultural preferences. They discovered that there were many ways to solve tactical problems, and the human ways were often surprisingly effective. 6 months after humanity joined the coalition, the Scorix hive fleet that Vexthor had mentioned finally appeared in contested space. They were an aggressive species, insectoid, operating on hive mind principles. They had been slowly expanding their territory for decades, consuming resources, destroying civilizations that resisted them. The coalition had been preparing for this confrontation for years. The battle that followed was brutal and exhausting. It lasted 3 weeks. The Scorix fought with typical hive mind efficiency. No fear, no hesitation, no mercy. They threw their ships forward in waves, accepting massive casualties to achieve their objectives. Their tactics relied on overwhelming force and numerical superiority. The coalition fleet, now including human vessels and human crew members integrated throughout the command structure, responded with a combination of traditional coalition tactics and new human innovations. When Scorix ships tried to overwhelm a position with superior numbers, human commanders implemented tactics from ancient Earth battles. They created kill zones. They used feints and retreats to draw the enemy into vulnerable positions. They exploited every weakness they could find. When a coalition station came under siege and seemed certain to fall, human marines volunteered for a desperate boarding action. They fought through Scorix-held corridors the way they had fought through buildings in Fallujah, room by room, corridor by corridor, refusing to give up even when wounded, even when outnumbered. They held the station until reinforcements arrived. Colonel Pierce, now promoted to General Pierce and serving as a senior coalition commander, coordinated human and alien forces with skill that impressed even Vexthor. He made decisions quickly. He adapted to changing circumstances without hesitation. When losses mounted and other commanders began to despair, Pierce reminded them that humans had faced worse odds and survived. That perseverance mattered as much as firepower. That willingness to continue fighting often determined outcomes more than initial advantages. The Scorix eventually withdrew. Not defeated entirely, but bloodied enough to reconsider their expansion plans. They had expected the coalition to break when casualties mounted, to negotiate when the fighting became difficult. Instead, they encountered forces that fought harder as the battle progressed. Forces that seemed to grow more determined with each loss rather than less. After the battle, Vexthor and Pierce met again on the same observation deck where they had spoken months earlier. Both showed signs of the recent fighting. Vexthor had a new scar across his upper left arm. Pierce walked with a slight limp from a wound that was still healing. "You were right, Colonel," Vexthor said. They had fought together now. They had shared danger. The relationship had changed. There was a bond between them that had not existed before. General, I should say. Congratulations on the promotion. Thank you, Commander. What was I right about specifically? I said many things during our first conversation. You said that human soldiers do not just fight when victory seems certain, that you fight when the odds are against you, that you find ways to keep fighting when others would surrender. I saw that truth demonstrated many times during the recent battle. Human personnel fought with a determination that inspired the entire coalition fleet. Pierce nodded slowly. We lost good people. 17 humans died during the station defense. Many more were wounded. Each one of those deaths hurts. Each one represents a family that will grieve. A community that will mourn. But they died protecting innocent lives. They died defending others. That gives their sacrifice meaning, even though it does not eliminate the pain. The coalition lost many good people from many species, Vexthor added. Over 2,000 dead total. It was costly, but we held. We did not break. And I believe that human influence played a significant role in that outcome. Your people showed others that perseverance is possible. That determination can overcome numerical disadvantage. They stood together in silence for a moment, looking out at the fleet. Ships were being repaired. Damaged vessels were being towed to shipyards. New crews were being assigned to replace those lost. The work of recovery was already underway. Do you know what the other species are calling humans now? Vexthor asked. I have heard several names, not all of them complimentary. Vexthor's mandibles clicked in what Pierce now recognized as amusement. The most common one translates roughly as the unyielding ones. Some species are calling you that as a sign of respect. A few are using it as a warning to others not to provoke you. But all of them understand now that humanity is not to be underestimated. That lesson has been learned. I hope we can be more than just warriors to this coalition, Pierce said. I hope we can contribute in other ways as well. Science, culture, art, philosophy. We have much to offer beyond our military capabilities. I am certain you will, Vexthor replied. But for now, in this moment, your military contribution has secured your place. It has earned you respect. It has proven your value. The rest will come with time. Pierce looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there were threats not yet encountered, challenges not yet faced, but also opportunities not yet imagined, friendships not yet formed, progress not yet achieved. The future was unknown as it always had been. But now humanity faced that future as part of something larger, part of a coalition, part of a community of civilizations working together. You know what I think, Commander? Pierce said finally. What is that, General? I think that conversation we had months ago,